Hi guys, welcome to another episode of The Crazy World of Dying. Today I'm going to be talking about a professional wrestler by the name of Sid Justice. Most people remember him as being Sid Justice or Sycho Sid. I'm going to talk about Sid and I'm going to talk about a couple of points in his career, mainly to do with wrestling. Just before I get into that, guys, if you haven't been here before, welcome, and if you've been here before, welcome back. So for me personally, growing up in the 80s and 90s, watching professional wrestling, Sid Justice, who is probably the character I remember him most by, was somebody who had quite an influence on me in terms of that period of wrestling that I used to watch. I was a massive Hogan fan. Generally, when I was growing up, you were split. You was either Hogan or Warrior. I was both. Probably preferred Hogan a bit more. So Sid Justice was certainly a wrestler that I would put alongside some of the others that I liked, and he certainly had quite an influence, which I'm going to talk about shortly. So Sid was billed as 6'9". I can't remember how much he weighed, but he fitted into the description of a big wrestler. You know, wrestlers like maybe Diesel, wrestlers like The Undertaker, big wrestlers, strong, athletic, powerhouses. He was certainly a wrestler who fitted into that category. Looking at accolades, he won the WWE, it was called WWF at the time, championship on 2 occasions. He also won the WCW World Heavyweight Championship, I believe. Or he weren't somebody that was just there to make up the numbers. So I'm just going to delve into the life of and the career of Sid. With wrestlers, they do have a long history. He had been in the business for 30 years, so I'm just going to condense that into the main points which are relevant to me. So when Sid first joined WCW, he was part of a tag team and he had feuds with various other wrestlers, including the Road Warriors. If you're not familiar with WCW, you may know them as the Legion of Doom when they were in the WWF, as well as the Steiner Brothers. So like most wrestlers, Sid had his fair share of injuries, and you could argue that he was more unlucky than most when it came to injuries, and I'm going to talk about a particular injury a bit further in this video. So in May 1990, Sid actually became one of the Four Horsemen. So the Four Horsemen were quite a popular stable in WCW. Ric Flair was probably the most recognizable and the most famous member of the Four Horsemen. You had Arn Anderson, who was also part of the Four Horsemen at the time, and Sid became a member. Again, showing the potential and the fact that WCW recognized him to be such a talent. They put him in a stable which was quite popular at the time. So I'm going to stick with 1990, which was a good, maybe an interesting year for Sid. So Sid wrestled Sting at Halloween Havoc in 1990. But the main thing that I'm going to talk about in 1990, and I didn't remember it at the time, it's only when I looked at archive footage, was Capital Combat 1990. Now, if you go back to 1990, what was big at the time? There was a couple of things. So you're probably talking about Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles or Hero Turtles, depending on where you watched it. You had maybe Simpsons. Simpsons may have just started around that time. And then there were a number of films that were quite popular, a number of actors. So Arnold Schwarzenegger would have been quite popular. And one of the films that was certainly popular around that time was RoboCop. And it's funny because RoboCop, I think a lot of children at the time would have recognized him, recognized where he was from. Knew RoboCop was this, cyborg man machine that would basically try and deal with any criminals. I think what people fail to realize is that RoboCop was actually quite a violent film. It's an 18, and rightfully so. I mean, if you haven't seen RoboCop for a while, have a look at it and watch it again. Don't get me wrong, I think it's a good film for its time, but it certainly worked for children. It's quite a violent film. However, companies and all sorts sort of jumped on the bandwagon and started to promote RoboCop, and I think it was aimed at children, which is really interesting because RoboCop is not a film for children. If I then go back to Capital Combat, there was a part of the show where Sting was put inside a steel cage by the Four Horsemen, including Sid. Somebody comes to save him, and it weren't another wrestler, it was RoboCop, and it made me laugh because it is so ridiculous. Have a look. Let me show you. Take a look. What do you think? So we know wrestling is wrestling, but to have Robocop um, at a wrestling event coming to save a wrestler, yeah, I found it quite funny. But Sid was involved in that. Sid versus Robocop. Good times. So we then moved to 1991, which was my introduction to Sid. 1991, personally, for me, was a good year. I'm going to take you to SummerSlam 1991, which was the match made in heaven and the match made in hell. So this event for me is probably the one I remember the most. And I'll tell you why. I was quite young when it aired, and I asked my mum if I could go to my neighbour's house who lived 2 doors away from me and watch it. So bear in mind, I was under 10 years old. Going to sleep after midnight was something which didn't really happen. It would generally be 3 or 4 hours long. I think 3 hours, so it would be on between 12 and 3, 1 and 4, maybe even later, maybe even 2 and 5. And I asked my mum, really thinking that she would be like, what are you talking about? No. And she agreed. She actually let me go around to my friend's house. We had snacks and we sat there and we watched the match made in heaven and the match made in hell. I have a real soft spot for this event for a number of reasons. I mean, let's just talk about the match made in heaven. So the match made in heaven was Randy Savage's marriage to Miss Elizabeth. Macho Man was in my top 5 list of wrestlers, and I fancied Miss Elizabeth like crazy. Good times all around. They got married, loved it. And then you had the match made in hell. And the match made in hell was a handicap match. Apologies, I'm not sure if you could say that, but I'm saying it in relation to wrestling. It was a handicap match, and it was Hulk Hogan and the Ultimate Warrior on the same team, which never happened before, against Sergeant Slaughter, General Adnan and Colonel Mustafa. And the guest referee was Sid Justice, so that was my first introduction to him. Brilliant event. He refereed the match. The match was won by Warrior and Hogan, and it was good times. So that was my introduction. Guest referee, done a really, really good job. And I'm trying to remember it, and I'm sure Sergeant Slaughter tried to get in his face a couple of times, and I think he dealt with him. I think the WWE at the time, their plan with Sid was to make him a babyface, a good guy. So they did certain things, part of obviously the storyline, to promote that. So one of the things that they did was, after the wedding, Jake the Snake and Undertaker, I believe, have tried to attack Macho Man. I think in the present, the box was a snake, if I remember correctly, and I think Sid Justice actually came to their aid. We then move on to 1992. So in 1990 and 1991, the winners of the Royal Rumble for both those years was Hulk Hogan. In 1992, he was also in the Royal Rumble. In a nutshell, he was eliminated by Sid. Bearing in mind, Hogan was the top face of the company. I remember at the time when I saw it as a person who watched wrestling, I couldn't believe it. Hulk Hogan had been eliminated from the Royal Rumble and eliminated by another good guy. Now, it's funny because now that I read things about that Royal Rumble, apparently when Hulk Hogan was actually eliminated by Sid, the crowd cheered. The crowd were actually happy. They actually were really happy for Sid to do it. But I remember when I watched it and I listened to the crowd reactions, they weren't happy. What I've since learned is that apparently WWE had changed the audio because they didn't want the crowd, or they didn't want people at home to know that the crowd were happy that Hogan had been eliminated. I think it's crazy how technology works. So moving along, they gradually turned Sid into a heel, a bad guy, and I think that's where he excelled at. So he had that famous segment, if you remember, when Brutus the Barber Beefcake had his barbershop, and Sid goes on a mad one. He literally starts smashing up the barbershop, goes, I think he tries or he attempts to attack Brutus. I think Brutus runs away, and there's like this famous sort of clip with Sid with all shaving foam and stuff around his face, looking particularly angry. I remember that as a kid thinking, man, this guy, he's nuts, he's on one. But I think really that's where he excelled, and I think further down the line when he became Sycho Sid, I think that was probably the era where he was at his best. I mean, the guy was a lunatic. You literally thought he had issues. So his promos, the way that he would like stare at the camera, start shouting, then go in a low voice, then do this and do that, it was it was great stuff. So I think that was a good period for Sid. You know, I think that persona certainly suited him, and he had the build, he had everything about him, it worked. So I'm from England, I'm sure you know. If I think of England and I think of Sid, what are the two things that I put together? And I put together a infamous incident which happened in the town of Blackburn, which, if you don't know England, it's more towards the north of England, not too far from maybe Manchester, Liverpool, Burnley, that sort of area, if you're unfamiliar with where the different cities are in England. But there was an incident in England involving Arn Anderson and involving Sid. The incident apparently involves Sid was threatened with a bottle by Arn Anderson. It looks like they were sent to their respective rooms, but Sid wasn't too happy about what happened. So he's gone to Arn Anderson's room and it's all kicked off from there. Looking at everything that's happened, it's a madness. So apparently Sid attacked Anderson with a table leg. Apparently Anderson attacked him with scissors. Basically, the result of everything was Sid apparently had a number of stab wounds to his body, and I think Arn Anderson also had the same. Apparently I've read something like 20 stab wounds, and he lost a pint or pint and a half of blood. I mean, to even understand what must have gone on in that room is interesting to think about, really. I mean, it literally must have gone off one. Imagine if you worked at a hotel and, you know, you hear the ruckus. You know, you go up there to try and break it up and you see 6'9" Sid, Arn Anderson, you know, on one. Yeah, you'll just leave him, wouldn't you? So in terms of the aftermath, neither of the two men wanted to press charges against each other, and that was the end of the matter. So I mentioned earlier in the video about an injury to Sid. So a lot of people agree that the injury that Sid suffered in 2001 is maybe one of the worst in-ring injuries that has been seen. I do concur with this. So I'm just going to give you some background into how Sid sustained the injury. Now, at the time, he was working for WCW, and it was mentioned to Sid that he needed to, I think the words were, broaden his arsenal. So i.e. do a bit more moves, add a bit more, maybe a bit more flair, or be a bit more adventurous in some of the moves that he would do. Bearing in mind he is a 6'9" wrestler, a powerhouse. He is a powerhouse, so, you know, he's not going to be doing flips. He's not going to be doing the things that you would see somebody like Rey Mysterio or Rob Van Dam. You know, he doesn't have that agility. Nevertheless, he was advised that he needed to add some more to his arsenal. So in regards to this particular incident, he has jumped from the second turnbuckle and he's tried to give one of the Steiner brothers some form of kick. It's worth noting that he did say to the person who mentioned that he should change or add things to his arsenal that he didn't feel comfortable doing this. Nevertheless, he has jumped off the turnbuckle, he's aimed a kick at one of the Steiner brothers, and he's landed awkwardly. And as a result, he's landed on his leg. He snapped his fibula and tibia, and the injury was so intense that his foot actually rotated 90 degrees anti-clockwise. So this is just your 10-second warning just before I show the footage of the actual injury. Thankfully, this wasn't the last time that we saw Sid in the wrestling ring, and he made a full recovery. And I think, again, that is testament to the man, because you look at the injury that he sustained and the level of devastation, it would have been easy for him to turn around and pack it in. I believe he was in his 40s, maybe 40 or 41 when he sustained that injury as well. Sid wasn't in the Hall of Fame. I suspect that he probably would have in the coming years, maybe even this year. However, I am noticing a little bit of a pattern where you're getting numerous wrestlers who are entering the Hall of Fame who are sadly no longer here with us. So looking online last night, I did see a lot of comments about that, and maybe that's something that the WWE would address in terms of maybe getting people in the Hall of Fame. so they could get their flowers, so they could get the, everything that they've worked for, get all the accolades and everything that they truly deserve, and not, when they're no longer here with us. So that's maybe something over the next coming years that will change. So like in all my videos, I like to talk about any interesting facts or any little snippets of information which I could find. So in relation to Sid, it's something I didn't know, and this was actually confirmed by him in a podcast. So he actually got into professional wrestling because he was at a gym and he actually came across Macho Man Randy Savage. Macho Man's brother was also in the gym, and they've basically remarked that with his size, his appearance, he would be a good fit to get into wrestling, and that's given him the drive, the influence to actually enter professional wrestling. So you could argue and say if it wasn't for Macho Man being in that gym at that time, Sid could have been doing something else. Now, in terms of something else, there was a period where Sid wanted to leave wrestling. I think he may have actually left wrestling to get into professional softball. Apparently he was really good at it, and he really, really loved it. So yep, that's another thing. If you didn't know, now you know. Sid used to play and was really good at softball. So the 1000th episode of Raw was quite a big episode for the company, and various people were brought back for that episode. One of the people that were brought back for the episode was Sid. I'm glad that WWE brought him back again, showing that the respect and the influence that he had when he was with the company, that they brought him back for such a monumentous occasion. So I'm glad that they did that. So I haven't seen the footage myself, but he was actually in Big Brother. He was in the American version because I believe his son, maybe both his sons, were actually in the Big Brother house. So from what I read, from what I understand, I don't think he was a contestant. So it must have been some form of task where he actually entered the Big Brother house. So if anybody has that footage or has seen it, let me know. I'll be quite interested to see. Now, numerous wrestlers have paid tributes to Sid, and I'm just going to show some of the tributes which are now trending on Twitter, or X, I believe it's called X now, isn't it? Which is now trending. As you can see, you got various people, but one of the people that I'm going to concentrate on is Booker T. So Booker T, one of my favorite wrestlers, and he said this in a podcast, and he's repeated it in his tribute to Sid. And he says that Sid basically paved the way for him and his brother to make it in the wrestling world. So yeah, and I think it's really interesting to hear that. It's not something how nobody would have known. But again, I think it just shows how he was as a man and the influence that he had. Which brings me on to another story with Rob Van Dam. Now, when Rob was starting off, he was actually involved, I think it was in around 1992, he was involved in a handicap match with Sid, where it was Rob and another wrestler versus Sid. I think it was quite a short match. Sid basically done the business on them, and after the match, Sid has given them $20 each. You may turn around and say, well, that's not a lot. I mean, first of all, it's 1992, and then this wrestler has basically given money off his own back to two up-and-coming wrestlers. Rob Van Dam actually mentioned and said that no wrestler has ever done that for him or for them, and he really, really appreciated it. And again, I think that just shows the character of the man. Now, I didn't know this, but Sid happens to be the first wrestler to kick out of Hulk Hogan's leg drop. Now, if you remember Hulk Hogan's leg drop, iconic move was Hogan's finisher, and if he done the leg drop on you, you literally didn't get up. I mean, if you think about it, even Wrestlemania 6 against Ultimate Warrior, he did the leg drop on Warrior. Well, he tried to do the leg drop on Warrior. Warrior got out of the way and got the win. So nobody had kicked out. Now, WrestleMania 8 was Hogan against Sid Justice. If you remember WrestleMania 8, it was a strange WrestleMania. Now, the story goes that Papa Shango, who I think was quite a interesting bad guy at the time, and I mean when he first came on, I was petrified of him. Now the ending of the fight, so the ending of the match was meant to be that Papa Shango comes down to the ring and he basically interferes in the match. But if you remember, the actual, I guess, the changing rooms to the ring was quite long. So Papa Shango actually missed his cue to get to the ring. So he never got to the ring in time. Hogan's done the leg drop on Sid. And because Papa Shango's not there, Sid has got no choice he has to kick out of the move to keep the match going. So he kicks out of the leg drop legitimately as well, as in he had a good reason to do so, and I don't think he got any heat from kicking out of the leg drop, which obviously nobody ever did. And then at the end of the match, Warrior makes his long awaited return, and he comes down and he saves Hogan from Papa Shango and Sid. So Sid has the distinction of being the first wrestler to kick out of Hogan's leg drop. So folks, that's the end of this video. Thank you for watching and listening. If you like this content, then please press that like button. If you want to see more of this content, press that subscribe bell and you'll be notified when I make new videos, new content. You'll be the first to see it. Also, if you've got any comments that you would like to make, I'm interested to read what you have to say, so please put something in the comments below. Any videos you've got, anything that I missed, please put it in. I will certainly have a read. Guys, again, thank you for watching The Crazy World We Dying, and I will see you on the next episode. Take care.